What's going on, Nasty Nation? It's Nasty, and in today's video, I'm going to be going over every single aspect of the champion Morgana. This guide is going to include skill order, build paths, counter picks, combos, and many more things. In case you're unaware, I've already made guides for Rakan, Taric, and Brand, but if there's another champion that you'd like to see covered, feel free to let me know by dropping a comment down below. Be sure to hit that like button if you do go on to enjoy the video, but without further ado, let's get into it. This video is sponsored by GoPlay. GoPlay is a free app for Windows, Android, and iOS that allows you to record your screen and edit the footage with ease. It's the perfect app for anyone who is looking to have some fun recording, editing, and making videos. No need to spend tons of money for an overcomplicated editing software when GoPlay is just as effective and absolutely free. Be sure to download GoPlay and give it a try for yourself. Thanks again to GoPlay for sponsoring this video. Morgana has been a staple pick in League of Legends ever since her release all the way back in 2009. She's a simple yet unique champion that invites new players to pick her up while challenging more experienced players to perfect her. But the biggest asset Morgana is capable of providing is without a doubt her ability to counter hard engaged champions. Overall, Morgana is a great champion to look to pick up because once mastered, her ability to catch out and lock down carries can single-handedly win games. Morgana's passive is Soul Siphon. Soul Siphon allows for Morgana's abilities to heal herself for a small amount whenever they inflict damage. This passive was originally created to help Morgana sustain as a mid laner, but over the years it has become somewhat useless as Morgana has established herself as a support champion instead. Nevertheless, it still comes in handy here and there by providing her with some additional health regeneration. Morgana's Q is Dark Binding. When casted, Morgana throws a sphere of dark magic connecting and rooting the first enemy hit. The root will last 2 seconds at rank 1, 2.25 seconds at rank 2, 2.5 seconds at rank 3, 2.75 seconds at rank 4, and 3 whole seconds when maxed out. If you've ever played against a Morgana and you're experienced playing League of Legends, then you already understand just how frustrating it can be when hit with one of her dark bindings. 3 seconds is a very long duration to be stuck in place for, and can very often lead to a quick death. It is important, however, to keep in mind though that this is only a root and not a stun. That means that although targets hit will be stuck in place for the spell's duration, they will still have the ability to auto-attack, cast abilities, or use active items. Be sure to max this ability first. Morgana's W is Tormented Soil. When cast, Morgana creates a small poisonous circle in the ground, inflicting damage to all of the enemies standing within it for 5 seconds. This is another ability that was intended to help Morgana be a mid laner, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't still have a use for her as a support. Instead, use it mainly as a way to poke down enemies in lane and gain gold from your support item. Max this ability last. Morgana's E is Black Shield. This is a point-and-click ability that when used will shield an ally with a magical shield. While shielded, the player protected will be immune from all crowd control abilities for 5 seconds or until the shield is broken by magic damage. This ability alone enables Morgana to be such a strong counter pick in so many situations. If Blitzcrank tries to hook your carry, Black Shield. If Thresh tries to flay you back in, Black Shield. If Rakan tries to engage a team fight, Black Shield. I can go on and on for hours going over every single situation that this ability would and could come into hand, but I think you get the point. Max this ability second. Morgana's R is Soul Shackles. When used within range, Morgana will latch chains onto all nearby enemies, dealing damage and slowing them briefly. If Morgana is able to keep the chains intact for 3 seconds, then all enemies still attached will be stunned for 1.5 seconds. This is a tricky ability to master, but when executed correctly, can be a big game changer in teamfights. I'll go more in depth on this ability later on in the video. Put a point in R whenever possible. I've done a good amount of research on Morgana's runes for the sake of making this video, and to my surprise there's actually quite a few different iterations of rune pages that are going around right now. And I'll be sure to cover all of the different variations, but for now let's start with what I believe to be is the best possible rune page for Morgana. I recommend starting in the sorcery tree with Airy as the keystone, followed by Nimbus Cloak, Absolute Focus, and Scorch. For the secondary tree, I recommend Inspiration with Perfect Timing and Cosmic Insight. Airy is pretty much the go-to keystone across the board for Morgana, considering it suits her poke from her W and shielding from her E very nicely. Nimbus Cloak, for those of you who aren't familiar with the rune, grants a short burst of movement speed whenever you cast your ultimate. This synergizes really well with Morgana given it makes it much easier to channel the entirety of your ultimate and land the stun. Absolute Focus is pretty straightforward, that's just going to increase your overall damage output, and Scorch will do the same. Perfect Timing is another rune that synergizes well with Morgana's ultimate and will, in the long run, save you some gold when it comes to buying Zhonya's Hourglass. And finally, Cosmic Insight is very straightforward, it just offers a lot of helpful cooldown statistics. As for the other variations that I mentioned, Mana Flow can be a replacement option to Nimbus Cloak if you do find yourself running into some mana problems. Celerity can be a replacement to Absolute Focus if you plan on building a lot of movement speed, and Biscuit Delivery can be a replacement option to Cosmic Insight if you prefer sustain in lane and additional mana. Feel free to mix and match and see which page suits you best, but again, my recommended page seems to work best in my experience. Summoner spells for Morgana should just about always be Flash and Ignite. Exhaust could potentially work instead of Ignite, but given Morgana has a very strong laning phase, I would recommend Ignite instead. Summoner spells can often impact playstyles, thus I like taking Ignite on lane dominant champions such as Morgana as a way to encourage myself to play up and play aggressively in order to look for kills rather than taking Exhaust, playing safe, and focus on peeling. Next up, let's talk about when you should be picking Morgana. Morgana theoretically can be picked in just about any game situation and be a decent pick, but picking her at the right times is what allows her to excel. The main thing that you want to be looking for when picking Morgana is if the enemy team has hard crowd control. There's a long list of champions in League of Legends that could fit this category, but Thresh, Blitzcrank, and Alistar are just a few support picks off the top of my head that are countered by Morgana. Keep in mind though that you don't always necessarily have to pick Morgana to counter your lane opponent. You could also choose to play Morgana into champions like Skarner or Malzahar or even Fizz in hopes of shutting them down later on in the game. On the other hand, you want to avoid picking Morgana into matchups or team comps that have little to no crowd control simply because your shield would provide very little value. This would include support picks like Janna and Soraka and other lane opponents such as Zed and Talon. Again, just to emphasize, Morgana could still be a decent pick against champions like such, but you're better off picking a champion who brings more to the table in these situations and saving Morgana for another game. Morgana is going to start Spell Thieves as most AP supports do and eventually upgrade that into Eye of the Frost. Be sure not to build the item any further than that though, because the extra stats and ward that comes along with the upgrade really isn't worth the gold that it cost. Instead, just leave it at Eye of the Frost for the remainder of the game, or until you've completely run out of other item slots. Mobility Boots will ideally be completed next to help Morgana roam around the map quicker while looking for picks and helping other lanes. The next item I would recommend building is Redemption. Redemption isn't a massive power spike by any means, but it does grant some mana regen, cooldown reduction, and a healing AoE active among other things that all synergize really well with Morgana. When it comes time to build the fourth item, chances are you're pretty deep into the game, which is why an item that encourages team fighting comes next. Once completed, Zhonya's Hourglass allows Morgana to dive deep into teamfights to lock down carries for teammates to finish off. More on how to properly do this in just a moment. Next up in the build path, I recommend Shrela's Reverie. This is an AP item that also has some health and an active that grants AoE movement speed. It's also very helpful for Morgana to help catch up to enemies to bind with her Q or chain with her ultimate. And finally, I recommend Twin Shadows. When used, Twin Shadows will send out 2 spooky ghosts that track down and slow 2 enemies, thus making it easier to land bindings. You could decide to opt for Locket instead if you feel the need for magic resist, but in my opinion, Locket is in a really weak state right now, so I'd rather sacrifice the magic resist for the spooky ghost. The lane phase can be a bit stale and repetitive when it comes to playing Morgana, but it's effective nevertheless. For starters, be sure to start with a point in W. One of the biggest mistakes that I see Morgana players doing is starting with a point in Q, and let me quickly explain why this is bad. You see, at level 1, even if you were to land a binding, chances are you won't be able to capitalize all that much. Sure, you may be able to outtrade your opponent ever so slightly, but that's just about it that you'll be getting out of it. It's just numerically impossible to kill your opponent at level 1 from a 2-second snare. After all, that's assuming you were to even hit the binding in the first place. If you start Q and miss it, you're instantly at a disadvantage and your lane opponent will gain control of the lane very easily. Instead, I'd recommend starting W. W won't do as much damage, but it's reliable, it procs Airy, it procs your support item, and it is on a much shorter cooldown. At level 2, then you can put a point in Q and finally put a point in E at level 3. Morgana's lane phase essentially consists of using her W on enemies to proc Spell Thieves and Airy while looking for bindings whenever an enemy laner steps away from the minion wave. And that's just about it. Morgana doesn't have too much of a flashy playstyle until the mid to late game, so just rinse and repeat this combo as much as possible without running out of mana and you should be good to go. Also, be sure to keep an eye out for your ADC and protect them from getting engaged on by casting your Black Shield whenever needed and play passive whenever this ability is on cooldown. Morgana is arguably one of the strongest roaming supports in the game. All it takes is one binding, and with the help of your ally laner, you should be able to pick up a kill. I won't go too in-depth on roaming specifically in this video, but if you want to know more on how to effectively roam, then be sure to check out my roaming guide out on my channel now. But for roaming with Morgana specifically, I'd recommend leading with a Q if the enemy has flash, leading with your ultimate if the enemy has flash and you do, and leading with Q if the enemy has no flash and neither do you. The reasoning for this is because if the enemy has flash, your goal is just to burn their flash and save yours, which is why you lead with your Q. If the enemy has no flash and you do, then lead with your ult or flash ult if necessary in order to guarantee the binding lands following the stun from your ult. And if you and your opponent don't have flash, chances are you won't be able to get in range for your ult, so in this situation, lead with your Q. As the mid to late game rolls around, Morgana's playstyle is now going to shift towards a more aggressive approach. At this stage of the game, your role should boil down to finding picks, shielding your carries from getting CC'd, and locking down targets in teamfights. Finding picks will come naturally as long as you're frequently moving around the map and clearing vision. Shielding your carry can be a little bit trickier considering using it too soon will allow the enemy to redirect their attention towards you, and using it too late will often result in the death of a teammate. Teamfighting is a game of patience that revolves around waiting for the right moment to pull the trigger. In teamfights, use your Q to hit frontline targets and peel for your carries. Use W whenever up to supply some more damage, and use E on carries in threat of being CC'd. Morgana's ultimate is a bit trickier to use properly in teamfights, so be sure to be patient when using it. Be sure not to use it on a single target and instead look for multiple enemies in a clumped up area. And if you're feeling extra confident, you can flash into the enemy team, pop your ult and Zhonya's while it finishes channeling for extra style points. I just briefly hinted towards one of them, but all of Morgana's combos include W, QW, Flash QW, QRW, RWQ, and Flash RWQ. W is used to trade in lane. QW is used to engage in longer trades. Flash Q is used to catch out and pick off enemies. QRW is used to engage on an enemy that has been hit by a binding. RWQ is used to more efficiently engage on enemies that are within a close range. And finally, Flash RWQ is the one that is used to dive deep into teamfights in hopes of slowing and stunning multiple enemies. I wouldn't recommend doing this unless Zhonya's Hourglass is already completed. That is, however, going to complete this Morgana Challenger Champion Guide. I put a lot of time, effort, and research into making this guide, so if you found this to be helpful or if you learned something new, please consider dropping a like, commenting down below, or subscribing to help the channel grow. Also, be sure to check out my merchandise, Discord, Twitter, and Patreon if you haven't already. Links will be down in the description below. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace.